The first time I looked out the reinforced glass, I swore I saw a human face drifting in the blackness, pressed against the abyss, as if the ocean itself had grown eyes. Down here, 7 miles below the surface in the Mariana Trench, light doesn't reach and sound feels like it's swallowed before it even leaves your mouth. I work at a research station where the water pressure alone could crush steel like paper, and the only thing keeping us alive isn't the technology, it's the 11 strange rules we've been forced to follow. I didn't understand how serious they were until the night I broke one, and something answered from the dark. I'll never forget the way it moved closer, when I realized too late. When I first arrived at the station, the senior researcher, Dr. Havelock, gave me the manual with the 11 strange rules highlighted in red ink. At first I thought they were some kind of twisted hazing ritual, but the weight in his eyes suggested otherwise. The very first instruction read Rule 1, never look directly into the observation glass after midnight. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press him, but that single line lodged itself in my mind. On my first night shift, I caught myself glancing toward the thick glass wall as the clock edged toward 12, and for a brief second, I felt as though the darkness on the other side was leaning in toward me, waiting for me to slip. I tried to tell myself it was nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. The hum of the station was a constant lull, a mechanical heartbeat that dulled your senses after hours in the deep. But the silence outside the glass was worse, the kind that pressed into your skull and made you believe you could hear thoughts that weren't yours. I paced the control room, my eyes flicking toward the steel clock bolted on the wall. Every tick dragged me closer to midnight, and with it, the temptation to disobey. It's strange how the more you try not to look at something, the more your body insists on moving toward it. By 11:55, I had started rationalizing. Maybe the rule was a leftover superstition, like sailors refusing to whistle on deck, or fishermen throwing coins into the sea for luck. The ocean has always carried rituals, and I thought perhaps this was nothing different. I poured myself a cup of stale coffee and forced my gaze downward, yet out of the corner of my eye, the glass seemed alive. I swear I saw a subtle shifting, like something vast had brushed against the station, leaving behind only ripples in the black water. My throat tightened as the minutes crawled toward midnight. When the clock finally struck 12, I told myself I wouldn't look. I sat at the desk, scribbling notes into the log, determined to keep my eyes down. But then there was a sound, not mechanical, not natural, something heavy grazing the outer shell of the station, dragging slowly as though it were testing the walls. The instinct to look up was overwhelming, a force far stronger than my willpower. I told myself just one glance couldn't hurt, just one. So I lifted my eyes, and that was the first time I broke the rule. The glass was no longer dark. Something pale hovered just beyond it, a shape almost human in outline, but too tall, too thin, with joints that bent the wrong way. Its face was pressed against the glass like a child watching through a window, but the skin shimmered like it wasn't made of flesh. The eyes were enormous, reflecting my own face back at me with a distortion, like staring into a warped mirror. My chest locked up, and I froze, convinced the pressure of my heartbeat alone might draw its attention. The figure tilted its head in a way that reminded me of someone curious, then its lips parted in a slow, deliberate grin. That was when the station lights flickered, plunging me into a dim half-glow. I scrambled back from the console, knocking over my mug, the coffee spilling across the notes. I didn't dare scream, didn't dare move, as though even a sound would break whatever fragile distance existed between us. For a second, I thought it was only a hallucination born from isolation, until the glass began to fog. Something on the other side was exhaling, its breath condensing against a surface 7 inches thick, meant to withstand the deepest trenches. My rational mind told me no biological form could survive out there, but my body screamed that something undeniably alive was staring at me from the void. I forced myself to back toward the hallway, each step heavy and unsteady. The lights buzzed overhead, struggling to keep steady, casting shadows that seemed too long for the size of the room. When I reached the doorway, I risked one last glance at the glass. The figure hadn't moved, but now its hand was pressed against the surface, each finger thin and skeletal, splayed wide as though it were testing the barrier between us. The fog traced the outline of its palm, and I saw lines etched into the skin, like symbols I couldn't read. Then, as quickly as it had come, the light surged back to full power. The glass was empty again. No fog, no handprint, nothing but endless black water staring back at me. I stood frozen for what felt like hours, the air in my lungs burning until I finally remembered to breathe. I wanted to convince myself it had been a trick of fatigue, but the spilled coffee staining my notes reminded me it had all been real. I gathered the manual with trembling hands and underlined the first rule twice, as though making it bolder could erase my mistake. Yet in the back of my mind, I knew I had already crossed a line. The next morning, Dr. Havelock noticed the mess on the console and raised an eyebrow. I thought about telling him the truth, but the weight in his gaze silenced me. Instead, I muttered something about clumsiness. He studied me longer than necessary before finally saying, "You looked, didn't you?" My silence was answer enough. He sighed and muttered, "Then it's already noticed you." I tried to demand what he meant, but he simply turned away, leaving me with more fear than answers. That night, as I tried to sleep in my cramped bunk, I heard something else. The sound didn't belong to the station, nor to the sea currents brushing against the structure. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. The sound of slow, deliberate breathing, coming from the observation deck at the far end of the corridor. I buried my head under the thin blanket, heart pounding so loud it felt like it would draw whatever waited behind the glass. When I finally drifted into restless sleep, my dreams were filled with warped faces pressing against windows, their mouths forming words I couldn't hear. By the third day, the paranoia was unbearable. Every reflective surface, the portholes, even the sheen of a polished monitor, seemed to hold a faint impression of something else, something watching. My coworkers noticed my jumpiness, but none of them asked questions. It was as if they had all learned long ago to avoid acknowledging the obvious. I caught one of the engineers covering the glass with a tarp just before midnight, his hands shaking the entire time. When I asked him why, he muttered only, "Easier not to be tempted." His eyes flicked toward the darkness, and I realized he was more afraid of looking than of admitting his fear to me. By the time midnight came again, I had resolved not to be anywhere near the observation deck. I stayed in the lab, surrounding myself with noise, the whirring of machines, the clicking of keyboards, anything to drown out the silence. But then came a thud against the far wall, deep and resonant, as though something massive had brushed against the station. The machines rattled, lights dimmed, and my chest tightened with dread. Slowly I turned toward the corridor that led to the glass chamber, and in the flicker of failing light, I saw it. Something pale was moving past the hallway window, its elongated limbs dragging along the metal as though testing for weak spots. I froze in place, my hand clutching the edge of the console. The figure paused, then tilted its head in that same unnatural motion, as though it knew I was there. My throat went dry as I realized it wasn't confined to the glass anymore. I found the second instruction the next morning, written in the same neat, cold handwriting as the rest. It read, "Rule 2. Always lock the bulkhead doors before midnight, no matter what you hear." At first it sounded like common sense. The station was a labyrinth of steel corridors and pressurized chambers, and locking doors was part of routine safety. But when I saw the way the crew handled it, I realized this wasn't procedure. As soon as the clock hit 11:30, every one of them dropped what they were doing, moved with urgent precision, and sealed the heavy doors. No one explained why, and no one dared leave it undone. I helped them that night, trying to hide the tremor in my hands as I slid the bolts and turned the wheels on the reinforced locks. Each door groaned shut, echoing down the narrow passageways like the heartbeat of some buried leviathan. When I asked the engineer beside me what the hurry was, he muttered under his breath, "Because sometimes it knocks back." I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but he had already moved down the hall, double-checking the seals. There was no humor in his tone, No trace of a joke. That was when I realized the locks weren't about keeping things in. They were about keeping something out. By the time the last door clanged shut, the station had fallen into a silence so thick it pressed into my ears. The lights flickered as they always did near midnight, buzzing faintly, and I caught myself glancing toward the observation deck where I'd broken the first rule. I wanted to believe the pale figure had been a hallucination, but the unease in the crew's movements said otherwise. We huddled in the lab, no one speaking, as though even words might carry through the water. Then just after midnight, it began. It started as a vibration, a slow rhythmic pressure against the walls that traveled through the floor into my bones. At first I thought it was tectonic activity, a shift in the trench, until the sound sharpened into a deliberate pattern. 3 slow impacts against the steel, evenly spaced, like fists pounding on a door. My stomach knotted as I remembered the engineer's warning. Everyone froze in place, their faces pale in the dim light. One of the younger researchers, a man named Carter, whispered that it was just thermal expansion. The others glared at him with a mixture of fear and fury, as though his words alone might invite disaster. The pounding moved along the corridor, closer to where we sat. Each thud reverberated in the silence, growing heavier, until it stopped just beyond the bulkhead door nearest us. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out rational thought. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that weighed on your chest like a stone. Then came a sound that made every hair on my body rise, a voice. It was faint, muffled by steel and water, but unmistakably human. Someone was calling my name. The sound was distorted, warped by the crushing pressure outside, but I could hear it clearly enough. "Open the door, please. It's cold out here." My blood ran cold, because the voice belonged to Dr. Havelock. He was sitting across the room from me, his face drained of color the moment we both realized what was happening. The thing outside was mimicking him, begging to be let inside. He shook his head violently at me, mouthing the words, "Don't answer." My body stiffened, every instinct screaming to respond, to deny, to prove I wasn't fooled. But the rule was clear. Never open the doors after midnight, no matter what you hear. The voice shifted then, deeper, wetter, as if its throat were filling with seawater. It began to weep, a pitiful sound that scraped against my nerves, alternating between sobs and laughter. I pressed my back against the wall, clenching my fists to stop them from shaking. Carter, the skeptic, couldn't take it. His face twisted with denial as he stood up and hissed, "It's a speaker glitch, that's all. Some kind of system echo." He stalked toward the bulkhead, ignoring the desperate whispers from the others begging him to stop. I wanted to grab him, but fear pinned me to the floor. Carter placed his ear against the cold steel and smirked, as if proving us all fools. "See, nothing there," he said. But even as the words left his lips, something on the other side scraped its nails down the length of the door. His expression faltered. The voice returned, louder now, copying him perfectly. "See, nothing there." Each syllable dragged, distorted, as if replayed by something that didn't understand human rhythm. Carter staggered back, his bravado melting into horror. That was when the door shuddered violently, bending inward under a force no human could produce. The lights flickered again, plunging us into momentary darkness. In that flash, I thought I saw shapes moving through the gaps in the steel, pale fingers prying at the seals, testing the locks. When the power returned, the door was still intact, but deep grooves marred its surface. Carter sat on the floor, trembling, whispering apologies, none of us accepted. Havelock barked orders to stay away from the doors, his face drawn tight, sweat dripping down his temples. He muttered something under his breath about how it never forgets a voice, and I understood then that Carter had given it exactly what it wanted. The knocking didn't stop until dawn cycle, when the automated lights brightened to simulate morning. Just like that, the station returned to silence, as though the night's horrors had been erased, but the marks on the bulkhead remained, carved into the steel as proof. I couldn't shake the sound of that imitation voice calling to me, using familiarity as a weapon. Even in the safety of daylight hours, I found myself glancing nervously at the doors, expecting them to quake again under an unseen fist. The next evening, as we prepared to seal the doors once more, Carter was nowhere to be found. His bunk was empty, his belongings untouched. Panic rippled through the crew as they searched every chamber, every lab, every storage bay, but he had vanished without a trace. The last place anyone saw him was near the bulkhead he had taunted the night before. When we checked the security cameras, the feed was corrupted, static replacing every image of the corridor after midnight. Havelock ordered us to stop looking and simply said, "If the doors are open, we're all finished." His voice left no room for argument. That night, as the locks groaned shut, I couldn't escape the feeling that Carter hadn't been taken by force. I kept hearing his last words, the way he muttered, "See, nothing there," as though convincing himself more than us. I wondered if, in the hours after, the voice had returned, sounding even more like him, whispering promises just on the other side of the steel. And I wondered if Carter, terrified and alone, had finally opened the door himself. By midnight, the pounding returned, louder than before, shaking dust from the ceiling. This time, the voice didn't mimic Havelock or Carter. It called for me again, in my own voice. Hearing my tone, my pitch, my words twisted into that wet, drowning cadence, shattered any illusion of safety I had left. The crew looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, as though even acknowledging it might bring the thing closer. I sat frozen in my chair, listening to myself beg from the other side, until the handle of the bulkhead began to turn on its own. After the horror of the bulkhead handle turning on its own, I went back to the manual, desperate for clarity. That's when I noticed the next line, underlined in the same sharp ink as the others, Rule 3. Never respond to voices that sound like your own. My stomach twisted because the timing was too precise. Whoever, or whatever, had written these instructions had known exactly what I would face, as if the rules were less a warning and more a prophecy. I had heard my own voice call to me in the dead of night, and though I hadn't answered, the urge had burned inside me like a fever. I tried to shake it off, telling myself the mind is fragile in isolation, and perhaps I had hallucinated the entire thing. But the faces of my crewmates said otherwise. They avoided my eyes, whispered among themselves, and one even refused to sit in the same room as me. It wasn't paranoia, it was certainty. They thought I had been marked. The air in the station grew heavier after that, pressing down on us like the weight of the ocean itself, and when midnight drew near again, I felt the dread settling into my bones. We sealed the bulkhead doors as usual, but the silence was different that night. It wasn't expectant, it was intimate, as though something unseen had already slipped inside. I sat in the lab with the others, pretending to read through sonar data, but every flicker of shadow pulled my eyes to the corridor. The station lights dimmed at the stroke of 12, and almost immediately I heard it, my voice. It wasn't distant this time. It came from the intercom. "Don't be afraid," it said in perfect mimicry of my tone, calm and measured. "You don't have to listen to them. Just let me in." I froze, every nerve screaming, while the others turned their heads sharply toward me. I swore on my life I hadn't spoken, yet the words lingered in the air, echoing faintly. The intercom crackled, and my voice continued, whispering things I couldn't bring myself to repeat, things about my childhood, secrets I had never shared with anyone. The crew looked at me with suspicion now, as though I were in on the game. "Doctor," Havelock slammed his fist against the console, snarling, "Ignore it." His tone carried more fear than anger. The intercom fizzled, then hissed with static, before releasing another phrase. This time it laughed in my voice, slow and broken, like a recording being pulled apart. My skin crawled as I realized it wasn't just repeating me, it was practicing, perfecting me. The rule warned against responding, but the pull was magnetic. I wanted to scream at it, to demand what it was, to tell it to stop. My tongue pressed against my teeth, desperate to answer, but I bit down until I tasted blood. The intercom went silent, and for a moment, I thought the nightmare had ended. Then the real horror began. From somewhere deeper in the station, the sound of footsteps echoed. My footsteps, they matched my gait exactly, each one steady, deliberate, heading down the corridor toward the lab. My heart thundered as every head turned toward the sealed bulkhead door. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then a hand banged against the steel. Once, twice, 3 times, before my voice called out, "It's me. I'm locked out. Open up." I felt every eye in the room snap toward me. I was sitting at the table with them, trembling, but the voice outside was identical. "Please," it begged. "I don't want to die out here." I wanted to vomit. The cadence, the desperation, it was exactly what I would sound like if I truly were trapped on the other side. One of the junior researchers, Maya, looked torn between terror and sympathy. She whispered, "What if it's really you? What if?" Her words hung like a noose. I couldn't even blame her for doubting. In that moment, I doubted myself. The door shuddered under another strike, and the air grew colder, damp with condensation forming along the ceiling. My double's voice grew more frantic. "They're lying to you. I'm the real one. They've trapped me outside. Let me in." My skin crawled as the others inched away from me. I could feel the weight of their suspicion, the thought gnawing at them. What if I was the copy, sitting among them, while the real me begged to be rescued? My chest tightened as I realized the true genius of whatever haunted us. It wasn't just trying to break in, it was trying to break us apart. Havelock snapped then, his voice low but fierce. "Don't speak to it, don't acknowledge it. If it hears your response, it learns." He was staring at me specifically, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. I nodded mutely, my jaw clenched so hard it ached. Outside the bulkhead, the mimic grew angry. My voice twisted into a guttural snarl, screaming obscenities, pounding the door with inhuman force. The steel groaned under the pressure, dust raining from the ceiling with each blow. I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to block out the sound, but even muffled, it was unbearable. The attack lasted hours, or maybe it was minutes. It was impossible to tell in that timeless dark. When the false voice finally stopped, the silence that followed was worse than the noise. None of us moved, none of us spoke. When dawn cycle returned, and the lights brightened, the hallway outside was empty, the bulkhead door scarred but intact. I collapsed into my chair, shaking, drenched in sweat. The others kept their distance, whispering among themselves. I had become a liability, not because of anything I'd done, but because something outside had chosen me. That day, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every reflective surface threatened to betray me. Every shadow whispered that it belonged to me but didn't. In the shower, I swore I heard humming, my humming, just on the other side of the curtain. I yanked it open, water spraying everywhere, only to find nothing. When I looked into the mirror afterward, for a heartbeat, the reflection didn't move with me. It blinked a moment too late. By the next night, exhaustion had worn me down. I staggered through the corridors, assisting with research tasks, pretending I could ignore the inevitable. As midnight approached, the crew locked the bulkheads once more. My chest ached with dread, knowing the voice would return, knowing it would keep perfecting its imitation. I sat rigid in my chair, refusing to look at the intercom, refusing to listen. That's when the power flickered and died, plunging the entire station into suffocating darkness. In the pitch black, I heard it again, my voice. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was inside the room. When I first read the next line in the manual, it felt less like advice and more like a death sentence. Rule 4. If the power goes out, do not move until the lights return. Simple words, but after hearing my own voice whispering in the dark just hours earlier, I knew why this mattered. The stillness of the trench is absolute. Any movement feels like it belongs to something that shouldn't be there. And in that suffocating blackout, when I couldn't even see the outlines of my crewmates, every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to fight. But the rule demanded the opposite: absolute stillness. The blackout had struck without warning. One moment we were in the hum of dim light, the next everything was swallowed whole. I sat rigid in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests until my nails dug grooves into the fabric. The sound of my own ragged breathing filled my ears, and then came the whisper. It wasn't through the intercom this time. It was behind me, so close I could feel the warmth of breath against my ear. "Why are you pretending?" it asked, in my own voice, soft and mocking. My body jolted, muscles tightening with the urge to turn. But I remembered the manual, remembered the words etched in blood-colored ink. Don't move, not even an inch. Seconds stretched into eternity as the voice circled me. I couldn't see it, but I heard it. Footsteps matching my own cadence, pacing around my chair. "They don't trust you," it whispered. "They're watching you right now, waiting for you to slip. You'll see how fast they lock you out." I clenched my jaw until it ached, forcing myself into silence. A chair creaked across the room, followed by a stifled gasp. Whoever had shifted had forgotten the rule. The voice moved away from me and toward the sound, its tone shifting from playful to eager. A muffled cry followed, then silence. I couldn't tell who it was, and I didn't dare ask. My lungs screamed for release, but I kept still, focusing on the steady hum of blood in my ears. Something brushed against my arm, cold, damp, too deliberate to be an accident. I wanted to recoil, to swat it away, but I forced myself not to move. The pressure lingered for a heartbeat, then slid away, vanishing into the dark. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat threatening to betray me with a twitch. I counted in my head, clinging to numbers, as if they could anchor me to life. When the lights finally flickered back, the room snapped into clarity. We were all still there, or most of us. Maya was gone. Her chair sat empty, pushed slightly away from the table, as though she had simply stood and walked out. But the bulkhead doors were still sealed, the locks untouched. There was no path out, only the black. Havelock's face was pale, his lips pressed tight. "She moved," he said, voice hollow. No one argued, no one questioned. We all knew what that meant. The hours that followed were unbearable. The air was heavy, saturated with fear, and every flicker of the lights sent us flinching. I couldn't stop replaying the sound of her chair, scraping back, the sharp intake of breath before she vanished. I wanted to tell myself she had been dragged, but the truth was worse. She had betrayed the rule by instinct alone, and that was all it had needed. I began to realize the rules weren't about survival in the traditional sense. They were traps, designed to exploit our natural responses. Don't look, don't answer, don't move. Each one demanded we fight instincts older than language. That night, I sat on my bunk, staring at the dim glow of the emergency lamp bolted to the wall. My body ached with exhaustion, but I didn't dare close my eyes. Every time I drifted, I saw Maya's face in the glass, her mouth moving in silent pleas, her eyes too wide. The mimic didn't just copy voices, it copied the ones we lost. I wondered if that was the point, to whittle us down until every face outside was familiar, until the urge to move, to speak, to open the door became irresistible. By the time the alarm signaled the start of another blackout drill, my hands were already trembling. The next test came sooner than I expected. At 11:50, the power surged and cut, plunging the station into darkness once more. I froze where I sat, clutching the edge of the table, my chest tightening. This time, the voice that emerged wasn't mine. It was Maya's. "Please," she whispered in the dark, her tone broken and wet. "I didn't mean to move. Don't leave me out here." My gut twisted with grief, but I refused to shift. Across the table, I heard someone sob softly, followed by the faint scrape of shoes against the floor. My heart lurched. Someone was about to make the same mistake. "Don't," I hissed, my voice low but sharp. The air thickened with tension, every molecule pressing in on us. But the sobbing continued, louder now, paired with the sound of shifting weight. The mimic's voice grew more desperate. "Help me. I'm cold, please." The scrape of a chair grew louder, and then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was so deep it roared. A moment later, there was another sound, a wet tearing noise, followed by a thud. When the lights finally returned, the chair opposite me was overturned, and the man who had been sitting there was gone. All that remained was a smear of moisture on the floor, seeping into the cracks of the steel. I pressed my hands over my face, bile rising in my throat. 2 gone in as many nights, both for breaking the rule. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from Havelock, but the words died in my throat when I saw his expression. He wasn't surprised. He had seen this before. He had known it would happen. I realized then that this cycle was older than me, older than all of us. We weren't the first crew to hear the voices in the dark, and we wouldn't be the last. That night, I made a vow to myself. I would follow every line of that cursed manual, no matter how unnatural it felt, because the truth was clear now. These weren't rules for living. They were rules for not being claimed. And as I lay in my bunk, staring into the dim light, I heard Maya humming in the corridor, her tune soft and sweet. My body ached to move, to open the door, to prove it wasn't real, but I stayed still, whispering the words of the rule over and over in my head. When I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, her voice followed me into the dream. The next day, while checking the outer sensors, I saw something that nearly broke me. A pale figure drifted outside the glass, suspended in the dark water. Its body was thin, fragile, almost human, but its face was Maya's. She floated there, eyes wide open, staring directly at me, lips moving silently as though begging. My hands trembled against the console, fighting the urge to lean closer, to read her lips. But the longer I stared, the clearer her expression became. She wasn't begging. She was smiling. The manual didn't waste words. Rule 5. If someone knocks from outside the station, do not open the door. I read it long before the first knock came, but the weight of it didn't sink in until I saw Maya's face pressed against the glass. Her smile had been wrong, stretched too wide, too deliberate, and yet my heart had betrayed me by skipping at the sight of her. That's what they counted on, not fear, but hope. The knock, when it finally came, wasn't violent. It was soft, rhythmic, patient, as if whoever was out there knew time was on their side. It started at 2:13 a.m., long after the station had settled into uneasy silence. A hollow tap carried through the steel walls, echoing faintly down the corridor. Everyone froze. No one spoke, but our eyes darted to the door that led to the observation chamber. The sound came again, not frantic, not desperate, measured, like someone politely asking to be let in. My chest tightened. It was a knock I recognized. Back on the surface, Maya used to tap her mug the same way when she wanted to get my attention during late night shifts. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps. My throat constricted as the sound repeated itself exactly. Havelock stood first, his expression grim. "Remember the rule," he muttered, as if we needed reminding. No one dared move toward the door, but the knocking didn't stop. It traveled, shifting from one bulkhead to the next, as though the thing outside could glide effortlessly along the surface of the station. Every few minutes, it returned, closer, clearer. Whoever or whatever it was, it knew we could hear it. The hours stretched unbearably. I lay on my bunk, staring at the riveted ceiling, counting the spaces between the knocks. Sometimes they came close enough to rattle the frame of my door. I buried my face in my hands, whispering to myself, "Don't open it, don't answer, don't move." But each time the sound came, My heart leapt with something treacherous belief. What if it really was her? What if she had somehow survived out there, beyond the black glass? The mimic wasn't perfect. Maybe she'd found a way back. That hope ate at me, like rust on steel. The next evening, it escalated. The knocks grew louder, harder, shaking the corridor lights, and this time a voice followed. "It's me," Maya whispered, her words muffled by the barrier. "Please, I'm so cold." I pressed my palms over my ears, but her voice slid through, threading into my bones. She begged, she pleaded, she called my name in the same cadence she had used 1,000 times before, when things were normal. My chest heaved with grief, and for one reckless moment, I almost rose. Almost, but then I caught Havelock watching me from across the room, his eyes sharp, calculating. He had seen it all before. That silent look reminded me. The rule wasn't about logic, it was about survival. I sank back down, trembling, as the voice outside shifted. "You're heartless," it hissed, tone twisting from gentle to venomous. "You'll all die in here, and when you do, I'll be waiting." The words ended in another knock, louder this time, so forceful the steel groaned. We didn't sleep that night. Every time we closed our eyes, the knocking resumed, steady as a metronome, patient as the tide. One by one, I watched the others crumble. Jensen sat with his hands pressed to his ears, rocking. Patel muttered prayers under his breath. Even Havelock looked frayed, his jaw clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth would shatter. The mimic had learned something new, persistence. It didn't need to break in. It just needed to wait until one of us broke down and opened the door ourselves. By the third night, something changed. The knocking ceased, replaced by a dragging sound, as though fingers or claws were scraping across the outer walls. I held my breath, straining to listen, until the sound stopped right outside the mess hall door. Then came the worst sound of all, the hiss of the hydraulic lock, shifting as if being tested from the outside. The handle twitched once, twice, as though something with human hands was trying to turn it. My blood froze. The door was sealed, bolted from within, yet the lock strained as if it remembered another key, another code. I don't know how long we sat there, staring at that trembling handle, but when it finally stilled, the silence was worse than the noise. We waited, every second stretched thin, until a faint scratching began again, this time on the glass window of the observation chamber. And there she was, Maya. Her hair floated weightless in the black water, her skin pale, her lips moving in soundless words. She raised her hand and pressed it against the glass, palm to palm with me, though the barrier. And then, like a cruel trick, she knocked. 3 times, tears blurred my vision. My hand lifted of its own accord, rising to meet hers against the window. For a heartbeat I believed. I wanted so badly to believe, but when her smile stretched too wide, too knowing, I snatched my hand back. The mimic's face flickered, shifting between hers and mine, then into something faceless altogether. I stumbled away, heart crashing in my chest, while the others stared in horror. It wasn't Maya at all. It had never been Maya. It had been the sea wearing her like a mask. That night, I dreamed of drowning. Cold hands pressed against me in the dark, pulling me down, while the sound of knocking echoed through the water. When I jolted awake, my sheets were damp with sweat, my throat raw from screaming. And still faint but insistent, I swore I heard it. 3 knocks, a pause. 3 knocks, coming from the bulkhead right beside my bed. I pressed my back against the wall, heart hammering. The rest of the crew was silent, too silent. Either they didn't hear it, or they did, and were pretending not to. I buried my face in my hands, whispering the words of the rule over and over again, until my lips went numb. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. The knocks weren't going to stop. They were moving closer, adapting, finding the seams in our will. When morning came, the station felt different. The walls groaned, metal straining under invisible pressure. The air was colder, thinner, and for the first time since we descended, Havelock's voice shook. "It knows we're breaking," he said quietly. "It won't be long now." That night, when the lights dimmed to their usual low hum, a new sound rose beneath the knocking, a slow, deliberate creak, like the sound of something massive shifting in the deep. The water outside trembled. The glass in the observation chamber moaned. Whatever had been knocking, it wasn't alone anymore. The handbook's phrasing was almost clinical. Rule 6. Never look directly into the deep observation window after midnight. When I first read it, I assumed it was about eye strain, about how the darkness of the trench could play tricks on the mind. But after the knocking, after the mimic's face flickered against the glass, I began to understand. The window wasn't just for looking out. It was also for something else to look in. That night, the creaking outside grew louder, resonant, as though the station had drifted into the orbit of something impossibly vast. None of us admitted it aloud, but we all felt it. The weight pressing against the hull, a presence circling just beyond the reach of the floodlights. The knocking had faded into silence, which was somehow worse. I found myself staring at the black smear of the observation window, fighting the urge to glance into it. Even peripheral glances carried a strange pull, like a gravity of the eyes, tugging me toward the dark. Havelock taped a blanket over the glass. It didn't last. Sometime past midnight, I woke to a metallic tearing sound, the adhesive strips peeling away, the blanket sliding to the floor. The glass stood uncovered, a yawning rectangle of abyss staring back into us. My breath caught in my throat. There was nothing there, just black water, just emptiness. But the longer I looked, the more I swore the emptiness was not empty at all. Something stirred behind it, not seen but sensed, like movement behind a closed door. Patel was the first to break. He approached the glass with a strange, dreamy calm, as though he were walking toward a lover's embrace. His eyes fixed on the black, his lips parting in a whisper. "It's beautiful," he said, voice trembling with awe. Havelock cursed and lunged forward, dragging him back by the collar. But I had already caught a glimpse of what Patel saw. Faint lights, far below, glimmering like a city at the bottom of the trench. A trick of the eye, I told myself. But the longer I stared, the brighter they became, arranging themselves into patterns, into shapes that writhed and shifted. I turned away too late. My head throbbed with static, my stomach lurching as if I'd been caught in a whirlpool. Behind my eyelids, I saw those lights still moving, writhing, forming faces, hands, mouths that gaped too wide. They spoke in silence, words pressed into my brain with the weight of the sea. When I opened my eyes again, my vision swam, the world around me bending as though the station itself had tilted. Patel screamed, thrashing in Havelock's grip, clawing at his own eyes, as though he wanted to tear the vision out. We restrained him, but he never recovered. He muttered constantly, describing impossible landscapes, corridors of coral and bone, towers of flesh lit by impossible stars. He said they had shown him a city waiting beneath us, a city that wanted us to join it. Every word twisted my stomach tighter. I had only glanced for seconds. Patel had looked longer, too long. By the next morning, Patel was gone. His bunk was empty, the hatch to the observation chamber wide open. No one had seen him leave, no alarms had tripped, but when we gathered in the mess hall, the glass of the observation window bore a single wet handprint pressed against the inside. The print was larger than his, much larger. Havelock's voice cracked when he ordered the window covered again. This time he used a welding torch, sealing a sheet of steel over the frame. Sparks hissed as the metal fused, and for a brief moment, I felt safe again. Safe until the sound began. A faint tapping, not of knuckles now, but of nails dragging slowly across the other side of the steel. The sound vibrated through the walls, steady and patient, reminding us that the barrier was only temporary. That night, I dreamt of the city Patel described, endless towers, lights shimmering like lanterns suspended in water. The buildings pulsed, alive, breathing, every wall a rib cage, every street a vein. Voices called to me from the windows, voices that weren't quite human. I woke choking on salt water that wasn't there, my throat raw, my chest burning. And in the silence, I swore I heard him, Patel's voice, faint but insistent, calling from just beyond the walls, "Come and see." The next few nights blurred together in a haze of sleepless terror. We spoke less, ate less, our nerves fraying under the constant pull of the unseen city. Sometimes, when exhaustion dragged me near sleep, I heard the others murmuring in their bunks, repeating words in languages I didn't recognize. The influence was spreading, a tide seeping into our minds. I began to understand why the rule existed, not just to protect us from seeing something dangerous, but to stop it from seeing us back. On the 6th night, Jensen cracked. He woke screaming, his eyes wild, his nails bloody from clawing at the wall beside his bed. "They're here," he shrieked. "They're right outside." We tried to calm him, but he broke free, sprinting toward the observation chamber, his voice hoarse with laughter and sobs. By the time we caught up, he was pressed against the welded steel, forehead resting on the hot metal. As he whispered, "I can hear them knocking back." The sound came then, low and deep, vibrating through the walls, a knock so massive it shook the station like a toy. The lights flickered, dust rained from the ceiling. Something vast moved in the water outside, too large to imagine, too close to ignore. My ears popped as the pressure shifted, my lungs aching as though the air itself were thinning. We clung to each other, staring at the trembling steel, and in that moment, I knew the city wasn't waiting at the bottom. It had already risen. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, praying the welds held, that the glass didn't return. None of us spoke of Patel, or Jensen, or the lights we had almost believed in. But I couldn't shake the truth, pressing against my chest. The sea wasn't just filled with darkness, it was filled with eyes. And now they knew exactly where we were. When the morning alarms chimed, the station's power surged, lights stuttering, a hairline crack had formed across the welded plate, spidering thinly through the steel. I traced it with trembling fingers, heart hammering as the faintest glow seeped through from the other side. Not sunlight, not bioluminescence. Something older, something hungrier. The crack pulsed like a heartbeat, and then just once, something tapped from the other side. The handbook had been blunt, almost cruel in its warning. Rule 7. Never respond to a voice that calls your name from outside the station. Back when I first read it, the phrasing seemed absurd. How could anyone hear a voice through 7 miles of crushing seawater and titanium walls? It felt like a bad joke. Paranoia disguised as protocol, but that was before Patel vanished. Before the crack appeared across the welded steel. Before the tapping changed into something worse. It began as a murmur. Faint, fragmented syllables that leaked through the static of the comm system at night when the crew tried to sleep. I thought it was just radio interference from the surface team, until I recognized my own name being whispered, stretched long and slow, like bubbles dragging syllables through a drowning throat. Daniel. The sound coiled around my spine, a familiarity weaponized. I froze in my bunk, staring into the dark, my ears straining against the oppressive silence. At first, I didn't dare answer. None of us did, but Jensen, already frayed from nights of seeing lights in the abyss, snapped. One evening, as the voice threaded through the comms again, he shouted back. His words were raw, desperate, cracked with a loneliness I recognized all too well. "What do you want from us?" His voice echoed down the corridor. Silence followed. Absolute silence. For a moment, I thought maybe nothing had heard him. Maybe it had been all in our heads. Then came the reply. Not through the comms this time, but through the hull itself, a voice booming and muted, as though the sea had learned to speak. It didn't sound like Jensen anymore. It sounded like all of us, layered together into one colossal whisper. "Join us." The lights flickered, the steel groaned, and Jensen laughed. Ragged, hopeless. before sprinting toward the observation chamber. Havelock and I dragged him back, thrashing, his fingernails clawing bloody trails across the floor as he screamed, "They're waiting for me. Their family." After that, we tried to avoid sleep. Every night, the voices grew clearer, tailoring themselves to each of us. They called my name in my mother's tone, soft and fragile, the way she used to wake me for school. Then it shifted. My brother's voice, cracking with laughter, though he had drowned years ago in a lake far from the sea. The sound was perfect, identical, and it broke me in ways I hadn't prepared for. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the voices weren't just in the air anymore. They were inside, vibrating against bone, dripping into thought, forcing memory into weapon. We stopped trusting each other. Every time one of us spoke, suspicion followed. Was it really them? Or was it something outside, mimicking from the other side of the wall? Havelock set up a system. Lights flickered twice for confirmation before anyone responded verbally. Even then, paranoia thrived. I caught myself staring at his mouth as he spoke, half convinced it wasn't his voice at all. Fear makes traitors out of everyone. The rule became our mantra. Don't respond, no matter what. But one night, exhaustion betrayed me. I was on watch in the control room, the crack in the steel still faintly glowing with that sick, underwater light. The others were asleep. That's when I heard it again. "Daniel." Soft pleading, and this time, it wasn't through comms or hull. It came from just outside the window, through the crack. The light pulsed as the voice spoke, throbbing in rhythm with my racing heart. I pressed my hand to the console, trying to steady myself, but my chest clenched as tears burned my eyes. The voice was hers. My mother. The words bent with static, but the melody was perfect. The lullaby she sang to me when storms rattled the roof of our childhood home. I had forgotten the tune until that moment. It was her. It had to be her. I almost spoke. My lips parted, my throat tightened, the syllable rising unbidden. "Mom." But then I remembered Patel's wild eyes, Jensen's screams, the voices that no longer sounded human. My teeth clamped shut, blood welling where I bit my tongue to hold it in. The voice paused, then it shifted, deeper, guttural, a mockery of her warmth. "You already belong to us." The light behind the crack brightened, spreading spiderweb lines deeper into the steel, as though laughter itself could fracture metal. When I stumbled back, alarms blared. Pressure fluctuations spiked across the monitors, red warnings flooding every screen. The station trembled, groaning like a wounded beast. We scrambled into emergency suits, clutching tools as weapons, though we all knew they were useless against something that could manipulate the ocean itself. The voices didn't fade with the alarms. They grew louder, shouting over the klaxon, filling the corridors with overlapping demands. All of them used our names. All of them used memories they had no right to know. We huddled together in the mess hall, staring at the steel plate, at the growing crack that bled light into our sanctuary. The voices didn't stop. They didn't even try to break through anymore. They just waited, patient, calling, confident that eventually one of us would answer, because deep down, every human longs to hear the voices of the dead again. And it knew that. That night, Jensen vanished. No alarms, no breach, no sign of struggle, only his empty bunk, and the sound of his voice now joining the chorus outside, calling my name with a joy so wrong it made me sick. The crack widened again the following morning. We tried to seal it, welding plates over plates, but the glow seeped through every seam like veins spreading through flesh. No matter what we did, it pulsed brighter with each passing night, and now the voices were louder than ever. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I couldn't tell if they were outside the station or inside my skull. We've stopped sleeping altogether. Our eyes are bloodshot, our hands trembling, our minds splitting at the seams. The voices chant like a tide, relentless, promising release if we'd only open the hatch, if we'd only step into the dark and answer them. I know they're lying. I know they want more than us. but my body doesn't care. My body aches to obey. The handbook was right about one thing. The moment you respond, it's over. They claim you, not your flesh first, but your voice, your memory, your soul. I'm terrified that someday soon, in my exhaustion, I'll whisper back without realizing it. And once I do, they'll never let me go. This morning, the comms flared alive with a voice we all recognized instantly, our surface commander. His tone was sharp, urgent, demanding status reports. Relief surged through me for the first time in weeks. But then, before anyone could answer, the commander's voice cracked, deepened, and laughed. A laugh that sounded like all of us at once. We're already inside. The crack split another inch, glowing brighter than ever. And for the first time, I realized the voices weren't just calling anymore. They were counting, whispering numbers under their breath, as though waiting for something, as though a countdown had begun. The handbook's words were short and cruel. Rule 8. Never look directly at what moves past the observation window. I had scoffed at it once. What could possibly move at this depth, in pressure that should flatten anything larger than plankton? It had sounded like another attempt to keep us in line, to stop us from staring too long into the dark abyss. But after the voices began counting, after Jensen disappeared, after the commander's mimicry taunted us through static, I understood why that warning mattered. It started subtly, shapes flickering in the edge of vision, the crack in the steel glowing brighter, casting shadows that swam across the walls even when nothing moved inside. At first I thought it was exhaustion, hallucinations bred from sleepless nights and ringing alarms. But then Havelock saw them too. And once two people see the same shadow at the same time, you stop calling it a trick of the mind. You start calling it real. The first time I truly saw it was during my shift in the control room. The voices outside had grown quieter, a deceptive calm like waves pulling back before a tidal surge. I was staring at the monitors, trying not to blink too long when movement flashed across the corner of my eye. My head jerked toward the observation window. For a split second, I caught it, a form impossibly vast, drifting past the glass. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't anything biology had ever named. It moved like smoke in water, tendrils curling and stretching beyond the limits of sight, blotting out the faint bioluminescence that floated miles away in the trench. No eyes, no mouth, but I felt it watching me, as if the act of glancing had opened a channel between us. My heart slammed against my ribs. An instinct screamed, "Don't look." I snapped my gaze away so violently. My neck cracked. That instant of eye contact left a mark. I could feel something crawl behind my vision, a weight pressing against the back of my skull. And though the voices outside had gone silent, I heard a single word, deep and guttural, vibrating through my teeth. Closer. I didn't tell the others right away. What could I say? That the ocean itself had looked back at me. But it didn't matter. Within hours, everyone began noticing the movement. Shapes gliding past the windows, sometimes small like ribbons, sometimes so massive their outlines erased every shred of light beyond the glass. The rule said not to look, so we trained ourselves to avert our eyes, to speak warnings without raising our heads. But we're human, and curiosity is poison. Eventually, someone always looks. Havelock was the first to fail. He'd been cracking under pressure for days, muttering under his breath, scratching words into the walls that none of us dared read. One night, he stumbled into the control room, pale and trembling, and sat directly in front of the observation window. His eyes were wide, locked on something only he could see. We shouted at him, dragged at his arms, but he wouldn't move. His voice trembled, childlike awe dripping from every word. "It's beautiful. You don't understand. They're showing me everything." We slapped him, screamed, begged, but his gaze never wavered. Then his nose began to bleed. His eyes bulged red, vessels bursting as if the pressure outside was crushing him from within. He smiled through the blood, lips splitting, and whispered, "It's so much bigger than us." Then, He was gone. Not dead, not broken, just gone. One moment he sat there, body convulsing against our grip, and the next he dissolved like ash swept into a current. Only his boots remained on the floor, empty and still smoking. We stopped going near the observation window. After that, we draped sheets over it, welded plates across the edges, anything to keep the abyss from staring back. But the station wasn't built for secrecy. Every monitor, every surface seemed to betray us. Shadows still flickered, long and sinuous, sliding across steel as though the trench itself had seeped inside. Sleep deprivation blurred our edges. I began dreaming while awake, flashes of cities made of bone and coral, towers spiraling into trenches deeper than physics should allow. Every dream ended the same way. I floated before a window, staring into the abyss, and something titanic stared back. Always too close, always waiting. When I woke, my eyes stung, as if I had been holding them open for hours. 2 nights ago, the voices returned, not whispering our names this time, but chanting in unison. They weren't calling to us anymore. They were calling through us. When they reached the count of 10, something vast drifted by the station again. The steel groaned. The welds cracked. I didn't dare look, but I could feel it. The shift in gravity, the pull of something colossal pressing its face against our fragile shell. And then Patel's voice. Dead. Patel, the one we'd lost weeks ago, spoke from outside, not through comms, not through static, but from directly beyond the glass. He begged me, soft and broken, "Daniel, open your eyes. I can't see without you." My whole body tensed, nails digging blood from my palms. I wanted to look. I wanted to see him one last time. My neck twitched, my eyes dragged toward the glow leaking around the sheets. But I forced myself to stare at the floor, until tears blurred the world. I don't know how long I can resist. None of us do. Havelock's empty boots still sit in the corner, a warning and a promise. The sheets we hung over the window bulge sometimes, as if something is pressing against them from outside, testing the barrier. The lights flicker in rhythm with whatever swims past, a slow tidal heartbeat echoing through the walls. And every time my instincts scream louder. Look, just once, just see what's out there. But the handbook wasn't wrong. The moment you look, it isn't just your eyes they take, it's everything. Havelock is proof, and if the crack keeps spreading, if the light keeps leaking, I fear we won't have a choice. We'll be staring whether we want to or not. Last night, when the chanting reached its peak again, I heard something new in the chorus. It wasn't just voices anymore. It was a question. Over and over demanding, relentless. Why do you hide from us? The crack glowed brighter. Sheets fluttered as if from breath, and the steel itself groaned like lungs filling for the first time. For a heartbeat, I felt certain the abyss wasn't outside anymore. It was inside with us, waiting in the dark just beyond my shoulder. And now, as I write this, the chanting has stopped. The silence feels worse. Something is pressing against the window again, heavier than ever. The sheets bulge, stretched to their limit. I don't know how long they'll hold. I can hear it scraping against the glass, patient, massive, inevitable. The rule says never to look, but what happens when the thing outside decides to look in? The manual phrased it simply. Rule 9. If someone knocks on the station door, do not answer. At first, the rule seemed ridiculous. Who could possibly be knocking out here? We were 10 miles below the surface, cocooned in pressure, thick enough to pulverize any human body. There were no visitors, no rescue teams, no chance of a ship docking. The rule felt like an afterthought, an urban legend printed into procedure. But that was before the knocks began. It happened on a night when silence pressed against the walls like a living thing. The voices had ceased. The shadows had slowed. The glass had gone still. For a moment, I believed we had outlasted them. Then 3 sharp raps against the steel hatch echoed through the station, impossibly clear, as if someone stood just outside with bare knuckles. We froze. No one spoke. No one moved. The sound was ordinary in its rhythm, but at this depth, its impossibility made it monstrous. Another series followed. 5 knocks this time, then 2, then 1. Each strike resonated through the floor, crawling up through my boots and into my bones. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. Havelock's empty boots sat in the corner like a witness. The memory of his dissolving smile flashed across my mind. I wondered if it was him, if he had returned, knocking politely instead of whispering through static. Patel whispered from the dark, "It's Jensen. It has to be." His voice cracked, desperate. We hadn't spoken Jensen's name in days. We all wanted to believe the knock belonged to someone we'd lost, someone human. But the handbook's words burned in my skull. "Do not answer." The knocking escalated. It spread across the hull, traveling from one end of the station to the other, like fingertips tracing the skin of a coffin. The sound was wrong. It didn't carry the dull echo of fists on steel. It vibrated higher, sharper, like glass splintering inside a cavern. With each knock, the lights dimmed, the crack glowed brighter, and the sheets over the window fluttered as if stirred by breath. Then it changed. It wasn't just knocking anymore. It became rhythm, a pattern. Someone or something was spelling words in sound. The cadence was deliberate, slow, a language I didn't want to understand. But as it echoed through the floor, through my teeth, through the marrow of my bones, I realized my body was translating it on instinct. It was asking to be let in. Patel lost control first. He staggered toward the hatch, his eyes wide, tears streaking down his face. "It's them," he sobbed. "They found us. They wouldn't knock if it wasn't them." We grabbed him, dragged him back, screaming into his ear that it wasn't Jensen. It wasn't Havelock. It wasn't anyone we knew. But the knocking grew louder, faster, more frantic, as though whoever stood outside could hear our struggle and was begging to be released. We reinforced the hatch with everything we had: tool chests, oxygen tanks, even a welding beam across the seam. It wouldn't hold forever, but it gave us the illusion of control. That illusion shattered when the knocking stopped. For hours, silence ruled the station. We sat in the dark, breaths shallow, waiting for the sound to return. And then, faint and muffled, it did, only this time. It wasn't coming from the hatch. It was coming from inside the walls. The sound crawled through the bulkheads, traveling room to room, pausing at each door before continuing deeper. Like someone was searching, politely announcing their presence with each knock. Sometimes it was gentle, a timid tap. Other times, it shook the steel so violently, dust fell from the vents. Every time it stopped outside my cabin, my heart tried to escape my chest. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't matter. The knocking bloomed inside my skull, echoing against thoughts I no longer trusted. We started sleeping in shifts, though sleep became meaningless. Whoever rested always woke with stories of knocking dreams. Someone standing at the door of their mind, rapping softly, asking to be let inside. When they described the figure, the details changed. Sometimes it was a crewmate, sometimes a loved one. Once Patel whispered that he saw his mother, drowned and smiling, lips blue as she tapped against his skull from the inside. The pressure mounted, inside the station, inside our heads. Conversations dwindled into silence. We stopped using names. The voices outside the window still called to us, but the knocks were worse, more intimate, more insistent. They didn't just want to be heard, they wanted to be answered. Last night, I nearly did it. I was alone in the control room when the sound began again, slow and steady. 4 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. My eyes blurred. My hands moved without command, reaching for the latch. I don't know why. Maybe because the sound was gentle. Maybe because it said my name. Not Daniel, not a mimic, my real name. The one only my father used. My father, who had died before I ever joined the Navy. The voice on the other side whispered through the steel, "Son, it's cold out here. Let me in." My hands trembled against the lock. I wanted to open it, to believe in something human, something familiar, but then the metal beneath my palm pulsed like a heartbeat. I yanked my hand away, bile rising in my throat. The knocking stopped instantly, as if whoever was out there could feel my rejection. Now the silence is worse. I keep expecting it, craving it even. The absence of sound gnaws at me more than the knocking ever did, because silence means patience, and patience means whatever waits outside knows it has time. We won't last much longer. The crack is widening, light spilling across the floor like veins of fire. The sheets over the window are tearing. The air smells of rust and salt. Something enormous presses against the hull at night, bending steel until it moans like a dying animal. And every time the urge to answer grows stronger. The rule says do not answer, but rules were made for people who still believe they have a choice. And now I swear to God, the knocking has started again. Only this time, it isn't at the door, it's behind me. The manual was clear. Rule 10. Never look directly at what enters through the cracks. At the time I thought it was just a metaphor, some poetic way of warning us about pressure leaks or structural stress fractures. But now, with the knocking echoing inside the walls and the crack bleeding white light across the floor, I understood the rule wasn't about physics, it was about something else. Something alive. The sound behind me wasn't just knocking anymore, it was dragging, like fingernails against steel, like bones scratching through hollow pipes. I turned instinctively, but the lights flickered, and in that half-second of darkness I realized I was staring at the wrong thing. The crack in the control room window had spread wider, and something pale was pressing against it. Not a face, not exactly, more like the impression of one, blurred and unfinished, like a memory forced through glass. I looked away instantly, heart hammering. My peripheral vision caught movement, a shape writhing along the seam of the floor where the light spilled. It wasn't solid, it shimmered, stretched, collapsed into itself. Every time the station groaned, it pushed further inside, leaving wet trails on the steel like condensation. I couldn't focus on it. Every time my eyes drifted toward its center, my stomach lurched, my vision bent sideways, as though my brain refused to process the shape correctly. Patel stumbled into the control room, half asleep, eyes glazed. "It's here," he whispered, as though confessing a secret. It came through, his pupils dilated wide, swallowing his irises until they were nearly black. He walked toward the light like a moth drawn to fire. My throat locked up. I wanted to stop him, but I couldn't move. He leaned down, peering directly at the thing slithering through the crack. For a moment, I thought maybe he was immune. Maybe he understood something I didn't. But then his scream ripped through the station. Shrill, raw, human in a way I'd never heard before. He clutched his face, nails raking his cheeks, blood blooming between his fingers. He shrieked that it was inside his head, rewriting the way he saw the world. His eyes rolled back until only white showed, and then he collapsed, twitching. I dragged him away, though he fought me like a cornered animal. His body convulsed in waves, and he kept mumbling a single phrase over and over. "It's beautiful, it's beautiful, it's beautiful." I didn't look. I couldn't. Instead, I tied a rag over my eyes and worked by sound alone, fumbling for the emergency shutters. The window groaned, the glass bowing outward. The white glow pulsed like a heartbeat. It didn't want glass between us anymore. I slammed the shutters down, sealing the crack in darkness. The thing inside his hissed, not loud, but sharp, a sound like steam whistling through a kettle, then silence. I collapsed against the console, my breath ragged, my hands trembling, but silence never lasts down here. I heard Patel breathing behind me. When I turned, his chest rose and fell steadily, but his eyes, God, his eyes, were no longer his. They had gone milky, reflective, like the sheen of a deep-sea fish that had never known sunlight. He blinked slowly, lips curved in a faint smile. "It showed me," he whispered. His voice wasn't his anymore. It carried an echo, like two people speaking at once. "You don't need to be afraid. All it wants is for you to see." I backed away, my spine pressed to the console. "You looked at it," I said. He nodded dreamily. "Yes, and now I can't stop seeing." His eyes flicked to the sealed shutters. Even blindfolded, I felt the weight of that gaze. "It's still here, behind the wall, waiting. It likes you." My stomach twisted. "You're not Patel anymore." His grin widened, splitting the skin at the corners of his mouth. "No, I'm more." That night, I heard him whispering to the walls, carrying on entire conversations with the cracks. Sometimes he laughed, soft and childlike. Other times he wept, begging it to come closer. Every word made my skin crawl, but the worst part was that part of me wanted to listen. The white glow seeped faintly from the seams, pulsing in rhythm with his voice. Sleep became impossible. Every time my eyes closed, I saw shapes that weren't mine, vast landscapes of bone and light, towers of flesh rising from the ocean floor, countless faces pressed against glass that stretched for eternity. They weren't dreams. They were transmissions. I could feel it trying to carve new eyes inside my skull, eyes that wouldn't turn away. By the third day, Patel had stopped eating. He no longer blinked, no longer needed rest. He simply sat by the shutters, humming in harmony with the glow. Sometimes, when I passed by, he whispered things he couldn't know, my childhood secrets, the face of a girl I'd once loved, the final words my father spoke before he died. Hearing those memories in his voice nearly broke me. I nearly tore the shutters open, just to see what he saw, but the rule held me back. Never look directly, and now the shutters are vibrating, bolts groaning, rivets straining. The glow leaks brighter, with every hour, a thin white mist curling into the room like smoke. Patel sits cross-legged before it, his mouth stretched in a grin too wide for his face. "It's coming through," he says. "When it does, you'll thank me." I don't know how much longer the shutters will hold. I can feel the thing pushing, hungry to be seen. And God help me, part of me wants to look. The last words printed in the manual had always puzzled me. Rule 11. If the shutters fail, do not run. Stay still and wait for the dark. It sounded fatalistic, almost mocking, as though survival was impossible past this point. But with the shutters groaning, the bolts ready to snap, and Patel whispering prayers to something that shouldn't exist, I realized the rule wasn't about surrender. It was about choice. Running would mean exposing myself to the glow. Staying still might be the only sliver of defense I had left. The shutters cracked inward with a screech, and blinding white light spilled into the control room. I pressed my back flat against the steel floor, squeezing my eyes shut beneath the rag tied around my face. Even through the fabric, the light pulsed hot, painting everything red behind my eyelids. I could hear it now, whatever lived beyond the cracks. Its movement wasn't footsteps or scraping. It was the sound of shifting dimensions, like walls folding and air tearing. It didn't move closer in any direction I understood. It simply unfolded into the room, as though reality bent around it. Patel stood, arms raised. His voice boomed with two tones, his own and something older, deeper, resonating like thunder in a cavern. "See it," he commanded. "Let it burn your sight away. Let it make you whole." I didn't answer. I held still, trembling, my fingernails digging grooves into the steel floor. My mind screamed at me to run, to hide anywhere else. But I remembered the rule. Running meant acknowledging it. Running meant seeing. The glow intensified, and the air grew heavy, pressing against my chest like water at crushing depths. I struggled for breath, every inhale filled with the taste of metal and salt. A strange pressure bloomed in my skull, like fingers prying at the edges of my thoughts. Images flickered unbidden in my mind, monolithic figures rising from the trench floor, colossal eyes opening beneath miles of water. countless pale hands reaching toward me. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, forcing myself to stay anchored in the here and now. Then the whispers began. At first they sounded like my own voice, murmuring regrets I'd buried long ago, apologies I'd never spoken, mistakes I couldn't undo. But then the voices multiplied, overlapping, thousands of them weaving into one chorus. They weren't speaking words. They were asking me to look. Just one glance. Just a second. That was all it wanted. Patel's laughter joined the chorus, high and broken. "It's not here to hurt us," he crooned. "It's here to change us. Don't you want to be more?" The shutters finally tore free, crashing against the floor with a deafening clang. Light exploded through the room, erasing every shadow. I curled tighter against the ground, eyes squeezed shut, rag pulled taut. My entire body shook as the glow swept over me, invasive and absolute. Patel screamed again, but this time it wasn't pain, it was ecstasy. His voice stretched into something inhuman, vowels elongated until they weren't language anymore. I felt movement above me. A shadow passed against the glow, enormous and formless, but its weight pressed down like the ocean itself. It hovered, waiting, searching. My instincts screamed to crawl, to scuttle into some corner, but the rule echoed inside my head. Stay still, wait for the dark. So I did, my breathing slowed, shallow and ragged, until I could barely feel my chest move. The presence lingered, curious, brushing against me with waves of cold that seeped into my bones. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted me to move. Patel wasn't still. He staggered forward, arms outstretched, reaching into the heart of the light. His body lifted from the ground as though gravity no longer applied. His voice cracked, words spilling out like prophecy. "I see it all," he howled. "The abyss is not empty. It's alive. It's always been alive." The glow thickened around him, swallowing his outline until he was nothing but a silhouette trembling in radiance. And then, as quickly as it had come, the light withdrew. The presence receded, dragging Patel with it. His scream echoed into silence, cut off like a severed wire. The control room fell into pitch-black darkness, not the soft dark of night, but the oppressive, crushing dark of the trench, the kind where light is an intruder, not a companion. I lay there motionless, waiting. My lungs burned, but I didn't move until the silence settled into something steady. Hours passed, I don't know how many. When I finally loosened the rag and dared to open my eyes, the control room was intact. The shutters were gone, Patel was gone, but the crack in the glass had sealed, leaving nothing behind but a faint shimmer. The manual had been right. Staying still had saved me. Running would have doomed me, but I don't know if survival is the right word anymore, because now, even in the dark, I see flickers of white in the corners of my vision. Even when I blink, I glimpse shapes pressing against unseen glass, and when I close my eyes to sleep, I dream of the trench stretching deeper, endlessly deeper, with something vast waiting at the bottom, and every dream ends the same way, with Patel's voice whispering from the black, "Next time, don't wait. Next time, look." I know I shouldn't. The rules are all I have left. But part of me wonders, what if he was right? What if seeing is the only way forward? The dark won't protect me forever. If you enjoyed this story, like, share and subscribe for more.